Hey everyone, welcome back to A Perspective. This is MJ speaking, and thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the podcast. I am beyond the moon thrilled for this episode because this is the first time I've ever had a guest on the podcast, and I was definitely very nervous going into it because I've never interviewed anybody on a podcast, much less in person, really. So this is definitely out of my comfort zone, but let me tell you that it could not have gone any better. It transcended my expectations so much, and so I'm very excited to share this conversation with you. Today I am talking with Shaina Gadow, who is a spiritual coach for women and a wild woman activator, and she is going to explain exactly what that means in this episode and how, as a woman, you can tap into your wild woman energy to create the life you want for yourself and the life that you were meant to live. So I'm going to let her talk to you about that. But before we get into the episode, I do want to take a second to acknowledge that this episode was recorded from the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, Coquitlam, Stalo, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations peoples, whose relationship with the land stands to this day. And as a Canadian citizen and as a resident of British Columbia, I do want to take a second following this territorial acknowledgement to acknowledge the bodies of the 215 children who were found underneath the residential school in Kamloops here just this last weekend. These news, as a citizen of Canada, but also just as a human being in general, were extremely heartbreaking and terrifying, frankly, to think that that was done to a group of children who were taken away from their families. And this is why these territorial acknowledgements are so important. And obviously, it's not the only way to show respect and allyship with our First Nations peoples that live among us today. However, it is a step towards recognizing that this hate and the hate that was done unto these children is still very much present in our society today. And as Canadians and as people, we have a lot of work to do to try to untame all the generational trauma that was done and still exists and still afflicts people today. And so if you haven't checked out the story, I do want to encourage you to dive into what residential schools were and what their practices were and how they impacted First Nations communities and how the trauma that was experienced in those schools continues to impact people today, so that you can show better support for the people around you who were impacted by this recent story. And yes, it's uncomfortable, and yes, it's heartbreaking, and yes, it is very difficult to have to face the reality that this happened and that it has probably happened in more than one residential school in Canada. However, to go towards the truth and accept it, but take proactive steps to change our current reality into something better, is the best act of allyship that I think you can take. So I encourage you to educate yourself on the matter, and until then, my heart goes out to the families who were impacted by this finding, and know that I'm with you, and my respects go out to you and your families after the terrible news, and I hope that you are doing what you need and what you can to heal. So without further ado, let's welcome Shaina onto the podcast. Shaina, welcome on the show. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I'm happy that you're happy to be here. I am very excited because you're the first guest on A Perspective, so this is really
Hey.
for me. And but also I think recently our society has kind of started becoming more aware of like self-wellness practices and healing practices, and I feel like I read about a ton of them, and I'm very interested in that field of wellness. And I feel like even after you've read about 100 of them and you think you know them all, then you hear about another one and you're like, oh my goodness, and it's like just as good or even better than the ones you've heard of previously. And you're the first person that I know to call themselves a matrix healer, so I'm very excited to dive into what this work is and what you do. But before we get into that, can you take a moment to tell us your story? Can you tell us about Shaina and how you got to where you are right now?
Yes, I am happy to. That's like That's a big thing, so I'll try to condense it down.
Beautiful.
Um, yeah, but let me just like a brief synopsis of my story
Mhm.
and how I got to where I am today. When I was young, and this may not be usual for people, it may be. When I was young, I was a pretty wild and free. I was the pink haired, crazy dressed, fully expressed version of me. And I didn't
Mhm.
care a ton about what people thought of me. I mean, of course, I did to an extent because we all do,
Mhm.
but I liked who I was and I was open to expressing that. And I wanted to be unique and I wanted to stand out and I wanted to be seen. And it felt pretty dang good.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then when I was about 16, it was just my mom and I. My dad had died when I was 10 and he had died of a heroin overdose. And so that was something that I felt a deep shame around and I didn't really share it with people. Um, and so it was just my mom and I. And she was my rock. She was sort of everything to me. And she was sober. She wasn't when I was young. But when I was a toddler, she had got sober. And it was her and I, and we were super close. And when I was 16, she started drinking again. And when she started drinking, my whole world sort of crumbled. My safety net, everything that I knew sort of got turned upside down. And I felt really lost. I felt really alone. And I also had to grow up, like in that moment, really, really quick. Um, and so after high school, I was basically on my own and I had like while my friends were off in college and being supported by their parents, I was working full time and taking care of myself completely. And at that point, I started getting the messages of like the way that you look is not okay, it's not appropriate. You need to, be more adult or whatever. And so I started to shift myself because at that point, my safety and security was the most important thing. And so I started to change how I look. I started to fit into the expectations of what I needed to be and how I needed to behave and to quote unquote grow up. And so I left that part of who I was behind and I followed the rules and I stayed quiet and I did what I thought I needed to do until I was in about my mid 30s.
Mhm.
And I found myself married. I had lost my firstborn son at birth. I was caring for my daughter, who was a toddler at that time, as well as my mom, who was terminally ill at that time,
Mhm.
while also working and taking care of our household. And one day I looked in the mirror and I'm like, who have I become? What has happened to me? And I felt completely lost again. And I felt like a shadow version of myself.
Mhm.
And understood that I had so much heartache and so much pain, which we all have experienced throughout our lives, that I had created so many walls around my heart to protect myself. And I created this version of myself that kept me safe,
Mhm.
but I lost my essence. I lost my like soul basically. I felt like I'd really lost that connection, and it was in that moment that I thought and understood something has to change. I need to find myself again. I want to find myself again. I don't want to live like this anymore. And that is when my spiritual path began. And
Mhm.
as my spiritual path began, that is essentially what led to the career path that I'm in now.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your bravery to share your story because that's something about you that I had no idea. And that touched me a lot, and I'm sure that for the people who are listening, it's going to touch them a lot because I your ability to transcend what happened to you and to take it into what you're doing now is really incredible to me. So thank you for sharing your story.
Mm.
One thing that I do want to ask you based on your story, just from the early times you were talking about, is so you mentioned that when you were younger, you really didn't care about what people thought because you were being you and that made you really happy. Where do you think that confidence and like that desire to be fully yourself came from? Because I think I speak for myself, like I think I fell prey to societal expectations from a very young age. And
Mhm.
now, like in my adolescence, I started realizing how much it was impacting me and how much it was impacting the way I express myself. So how, like where was that cultivated? Was that your parents? Was that just like something you were born with? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that it was my mom because when in those years that she wasn't drinking and that we were really close, she showed me so much unconditional love, and I'm incredibly grateful that I had that time with her that created sort of this core within me. Had she been drinking my whole life and I
Mhm,
hadn't had a dad, I can't imagine where I might have been now. But
mhm,
in those essential years, she really did show me a lot of love. And she was the first wild woman, really. She was outside of those norms. I mean, I won't go into her history, but she was
mhm,
very much outside of social norms her whole life. And she was the strong biker woman who had tattoos and who like was in bars beating up guys. Not like that's a good thing, but like she wasn't the typical mom.
yeah.
Uh, and so I've learned from her at a very young age what it looked like to be yourself. And I don't think she ever truly loved herself. And so I think the energy of that got into me,
Mhm,
but she loved me and she shared that with me every day. And she helped me believe in myself because she believed in me in those years. So I think that really helped. And she gave me a lot of room be to self-express in whatever way that I wanted to. And she never judged that. She never told me it wasn't okay, that I should look different or act different. And so that I think really helped in those younger years.
mhm. That's incredible, and I think, I mean, I'm not a parent yet, I'm only 21, but I think that as a parent, that's one of the best gifts you can ever give your child, right? Is that way for them
Absolutely.
to express themselves and explore themselves regardless of, like, what norms are dominating the media right now, right?
Right, right.
That's
Yeah,
incredible, that's
absolutely.
awesome. Can you tell us what a Wild Woman Activator is and how you branded this name for yourself, if you did, if that was, like, an original Shaina Gadow?
Yeah, it is. It
Hey,
is.
beautiful.
I mean, I don't actually know if it is. It's probably not because who really ever has original thoughts? I'm sure there's
Mm,
lots of people who do wild women activations.
mhm.
I don't know that people have claimed themselves as in wild woman activator. I'm sure they
You're the
have.
first person I know too, so if that if that makes a difference.
Um, yeah, I got really into this idea. So when I think of like what had happened to me as I matured and had to be responsible, and what I think what you were talking into, where you came, you felt that expectation of fitting into those social norms and being a certain way at a younger age. I think that's so normal. I think we get this programming and this conditioning so young into this good girl archetype or paradigm of, we have to be quiet. As girls, we have to be quiet. We have to be nice. We have to follow the rules. We have to look pretty. We have to stay small. All of these things, we have to please others. All of these things that we learn at such a young age to feel loved and to be accepted, right? You hear that and you're like, oh, you're such a good girl. And you're like, oh, yay, you love
Yeah.
me. Right. And that as a young kid, that makes sense. That's how we are understanding how to be loved. That's how we're understanding how to be accepted. And then as we get older, if we stay in that,
Mhm.
in in that belief system of we need to please others, we need to be perfect, we need to look good, we need to have it all together, we need to be giving, giving, giving.
Mhm.
That is how we lose ourselves. And so my activating the wild woman is, it's an inherent energy or archetype within us all that says, I don't need to follow these rules that are prescribed by other people to feel good enough. I don't need to please everybody to feel good enough. Like, underlying this wild woman is a wild sense of self-love and worthiness, this understanding of knowing our inherent worth and loving who we are and embracing all of us, that we no longer have to look outside of ourselves to feel accepted, to feel good enough, to feel loved. And that creates such a freedom. It's like a liberation to, I get to follow the guidance of my own heart and soul. I don't need to look outside for that validation. I get to trust myself and my own intuition instead of looking again outside of what is the right way to do it. What do you think I need to do? How do you think I need to be? And that allows us to create our lives on our own terms. We get to reclaim ourselves, we get to reclaim our lives, we get to find our joy again. And that is sort of the idea of what the wild woman is to me. It's really a reclamation, it's a soul reclamation of who we really are, and embracing all of ourselves with an unconditional love and compassion.
Mhm. That was very powerful. I absolutely love that. And I love the philosophy behind your work and what you're doing. And I think I fully agree. I think that our society is only recently becoming aware of the amount of labels that have been placed on women and how much that is holding us back in our everyday life. Like just a couple weeks ago, I was listening to a podcast on a woman who she set it as her goal to, like, she wouldn't talk, she wouldn't say anything unless she knew what she was about to say was genuinely from her and not like a societal, like a product of society, right? And
Mm-hmm.
she said she didn't talk for a month because I know, which is crazy, because it just goes to show how tamed we are to morph ourselves into this expectation of like what a woman should be and like how she should act and how she's like, her main purpose is here to please others, which is berserk. Like, I think it's horrible, and we have a lot of work to do around that. So I love that this is what you're dedicated to doing. um can you tell us how, so after, when you were on your own and you started morphing yourself into these societal expectations, how did you, can you describe to us the moment where you realized that you had fallen prey to that, and how you started the work towards activating your old wild woman energy, and how long that took you, what that process was like for you, etc.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I think it started in how, where I described the life up into my early 30s, where I found myself inundated with basically self-sacrifice. I'd given all of myself away,
Mhm.
um, into these roles of like, I want to be the perfect mother, and I want to be the perfect daughter for my own mother. And at the time, she was terminally ill, and she is now passed. So I wanted to be there for her and to support her in that way, but also, um, it was it was incredibly challenging and taking a lot of myself to do that, while also trying to hold together the rest of my life, in wanting it to all still be the same. Like, I want my life to still work really, really well, and be able to work and care for my daughter, and be a good wife and all of these things, and care for our house while my mom is literally dying. And
Mhm.
so it's an interesting place to be, where it's like, I wasn't allowing myself to fall apart. I wasn't allowing myself to, my life to be representative of what I was going through. You have to, like, this thought that I had to keep it all together. And it was in that moment, and when I realized like, who am I and why, like, what has happened to my life? And so that's where it started. And in that moment, I was like, okay, I need something to change. I need to find myself again. I need to find my joy again. Because honestly, at that point, I didn't know what brought me joy. I didn't have anything that was just for me anymore. And so that's when I started on that on my spiritual path. And it really started with yoga. I found yoga, and that helped me to reconnect to my body, because I also suffered from pretty debilitating anxiety throughout my whole life. And so I was very disconnected to my body. I was very much all up in my head. And so yoga allowed me to reconnect to my body and start to create a relationship with myself that felt healthier and more loving. And I started meditating, and then I started going down the road of reading every self-help book and listening to every podcast, doing all of that and really immersing myself in the world of self-help. And it was helping, and I was starting to feel shifts. I was feeling less anxiety. I was feeling more spacious. I was feeling more calm. And yet I wasn't experiencing the level of change that I desired. I was still in a job that I hated and really didn't know how I was going to be able, like, I didn't see a possibility where I could have something different. I could do something different. I didn't believe that I was capable of doing something different. I still had a lot of self-doubt. I still, my marriage wasn't doing well. It was like surface level self improvement, where I was seeing some shifts, I was seeing some results, but not the deep levels of change that I desired. And that is when I realized, okay, and that was a couple years. It was like a couple years of going down that road where it's like, okay, things are feeling a bit better, and I feel like I'm doing something for myself. And yet it wasn't creating the level of change that I really wanted. And I came to this like aha moment and this realization that, okay, I am reading all these books, I'm ingesting all this information, but I'm not actually integrating any of it. I'm not actually doing any of the things. I'm just going like, yep, that makes sense. Yep, I get that. Yep. But I wasn't actually doing anything. And I was doing, I was doing the meditation, I was doing the yoga, but I wasn't doing the deeper level of work. And so that was like a big aha moment for me of, okay, if I really want to experience the changes that I desire, if I really want to feel more freedom, if I really want to feel happier, more joyful, more expansion and possibility in my life, then I have to dive deeper. I have to dive below the surface of this work. And so that is when I hired my first coach. And when I hired my first coach, I got introduced to tapping and the matrix work. And that really, tapping and matrix work, for those who don't know, people are probably familiar with tapping EFT, emotional freedom technique. It really allows you to dive into the subconscious. And once I figured that out, that is the deeper level work we need to do to create real change, is to go into the subconscious where our core beliefs are sitting, right? Our subconscious is what is operating our lives. It's operating like 95% of our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our behaviors, our habits, all of the things. And so unless we do that deeper level work and shift at the subconscious level, we can't make the changes that we really want to. And tapping, when I had my first coach and she introduced me to tapping and matrix work, that is when I started to see the significant shifts in my life.
That's incredible. And what did those shifts look like for you, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah. So I'll just share the first experience I had with her. I was talking about how I didn't feel like my voice was important, that I didn't feel like my voice mattered.
Okay.
And I'm sure that plenty of people feel that way, whether or not they realize it or not, but it's
Mhm.
often why we don't speak up, we don't share our opinions, we don't share our voice.
Mhm.
And she was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." And we did some tapping around that, to just bring down. So, what tapping, are you familiar with tapping?
Yes, I mean, I know one other person who practices tapping in their daily life, so to an extent, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
For your audience, tapping is a modality in which it uses the acupressure points. So if you think like in Chinese medicine, we have these meridians, these energy lines that flow through our system, and it's how our energy flows. And there's points along these meridians that we can access to
Mhm.
help move energy that might be blocked. And so you tap on these points while you talk about whatever it is that is up for you, whatever emotional intensity is up for you. And it allows you to release that energy from your body. So if I'm like in that moment, if I was feeling like a really intense feeling of my voice doesn't matter, nobody cares what I have to say, I can tap on those points and it just sort of brings that intensity down. And so it doesn't feel as big anymore. But then the matrix work, what she introduced me to the matrix work is allowing us to connect to the memories
Mhm.
that created that belief system in the first place. So with matrix work, we can connect to those traumas or those negative experience where those beliefs were originally created, and we can heal and repair them. And so where you can do this work with tapping, but it's not as uh it's not as I don't think it's as effective and it's not as gentle to do the belief work with it. But so, what we found when we went into a memory is that it brought me back to when I was, I don't know, maybe 16 or 17. And my mom was in a bar and she was drunk. And I was tasked with having to get her home and not drive home drunk. And so I go into this bar as a teenager to try to get my mom out. And she starts yelling at me and telling me to leave. And in that moment, what my younger self, my teenage self, like really took in as a belief is my voice doesn't matter. My voice isn't important. She's not listening to me. She doesn't care what I have to say.
Mhm.
And that stuck with me. And through the matrix work, we are able to, it's really, really incredibly magical and powerful work where we are able to go in and shift that memory. Now, it doesn't make the memory go away. It's not like we deny the truth of our past experience,
Mhm.
but we're able to recreate for that younger self a new image that helps support creating a new belief. So I
Mhm.
was able to create an image uh, where my mom listened to me, and my mom walked out of that bar with me and told me that, I love you and I hear you and let's go. And
Mhm.
so for my younger self, that's exactly what she needed. Because the idea is when we experience these traumas, there is a part of us, a part of our younger self that breaks off and is like still living that trauma over and over and over again. And
Mhm.
that's the energy that gets stuck in our system.
Mhm.
And so through this work, it's energy work. Through this work, we are able to heal that and and create a new experience. So when I did that matrix work and was able to heal and repair that memory and that trauma that I had in that moment, I was able to create a new belief for myself that, oh, my voice does matter. What I have to say is important. And that changes the whole frequency in which I'm vibrating at that point. So I came out of that experience with that coach feeling so much freedom, so much, such a profound shift that allowed me from that moment on, like, here I am on this podcast sharing my voice,
Yeah.
it allowed me to go into the work that I do now, believing that what I have to say and what I have to teach and what I have to offer matters, where before I would have never believed that to be true. And if you don't believe it subconsciously, if you don't believe it, it's not, you're not gonna be able to create the change. Our subconscious and our conscious mind have to be congruent in order to create the change we want to in our life. And so that was the first experience I had with that work. And once I had that, it was so profound for me in shifting my energy that I was like, okay, I'm getting trained in this stuff. So I went and got trained for tapping, got trained for the matrix work. And throughout that whole training, I was just so lit up. Like, this is the most amazing work I have ever experienced. It's just so profound and so magical and so life changing, that I knew that was the work that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And you know what, just you saying that, like, I can tell that, like, how much you love it. And I mean, people listening right now can't see you, but I can see it in your face, like how much it lights you up. And that's incredible. And the reason why I admire this kind of work so much is because I think that we're so convinced that we shouldn't feel pain, right? That it's something that we should shy away from because it's debilitating, because it's scary. But like, something that I try to tell people when they come to me about their past or past traumas is that, like, no matter what you try to do, you can't change your past, right? And I think it's so much of a better use of your time, but also so much better for you as a whole to try to go towards it and try to face it and try to untame yourself from the things that happen in your past that have put you where you are in the state that you are now, whatever that may be. And I think that for you to take that moment and recognize how deeply it might have impacted you, even if you didn't realize in that moment, because it's insane how our brain is so wired to protect us that it automatically just creates this whole story to, like, tell you, like, to protect you from speaking up in the future. Right? Like,
right, that was dangerous, so don't do that again.
Exactly, which is not at all the truth, right? But it's insane how one experience can shift our perspective so dramatically and so deeply. And I love that you were able to go towards that and redefine that moment for yourself and, like, reconnect with your mom and your roots that way. Because that's
yeah, and I think that's such a big key to what you're saying, is that we can't change the past. That's right. We can't change what has happened. But what we can change is the meaning that we give those experiences, because that is the key, is that when we have these experiences, when we go through trauma, we create meaning. We create meaning about ourselves. We create meaning about the world. And often it is negative, right? Often it is something to help protect us. And then the way to help protect us is keeping us small, keeping us safe. And it ends up caging us, and it ends up creating all of these limitations about what we believe is possible for us. And so doing this work with tapping, with matrix, with any way to sort of get to the roots of these belief systems is just about changing the meaning so that we are no longer confined by that. So we can create new, more empowering and supportive meaning behind it, is so that we are empowered to live our lives in the way that we want to.
And the way that we're meant to.
Yes.
So engaged by those experiences. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. So we can become the version of ourselves that we have always meant to be, that before we had these experiences that made us feel like it wasn't safe.
I love that. I love that coaching philosophy. How do you implement that philosophy into your own work with clients? And something I'm really curious to know too is if you are implementing or passing down any of these like teachings to your daughter in, like,
those are two very different questions.
I'm sure so we can answer them separately.
Yeah. So The way that I work with my clients is really around, we come in with an understanding of like, where are you now? It's like really meeting them where they are now and where do they want to go? What is the change that they want to create?
Mhm.
And then we look at what are the beliefs that you have now that are getting in the way of where you want to be, who you want to be, who you know yourself to be.
Mhm.
And we just work with the energy that is there. And I help to support them to sort of unravel all of these walls that are around them, to break down the barriers around their heart, to learn to love themselves again. And that's what I believe all of this work comes down to. That is the foundation of the work that I do with clients, is learning to unconditionally love themselves, learning to hold themselves in the most positive regard, to have like ample self-compassion for themselves and to truly know their worth, because this is
Mhm.
in, with these traumas that we experience, with these negative memories that we have, and they can be like significant traumas like abuse and loss and things like that, or it can be the littlest things that your parents just ignored you in a moment and you're a little kid and you don't understand why, and so in that moment you're like, oh, I guess I'm not important.
Yeah.
All these beliefs that we hold from these traumas basically come down to, something is wrong with me, I am not good enough, I am not lovable, I am not worthy of or deserving of being loved or the things that I desire. That is what it all boils down to.
Mhm.
And so doing this work with the women that I work with is moving through that to understand the truth of who they really are, which to me, my belief is, we are all divine beings. We are all inherently worthy. We are all inherently lovable and unconditionally loving people. And so bringing them back to that understanding, bringing them back to that knowing. And we do that through this matrix work of diving deep into where those beliefs were originally created and healing and repairing them. And so they create these new beliefs, because everything is energy. And if we are subconsciously vibrating from the energy of, I am unworthy and I am, something is irrevocably like damaged about me, which was a belief I had from my father being a heroin addict and my mom also being an heroin user and alcohol addicted woman
Mhm.
when I was a baby, is like, I am damaged goods.
Yeah.
And so being able to dive deep into that and and unravel that and repair and heal those and create new affirming beliefs of how worthy and deserving and lovable you are,
Mhm.
shifts our vibration, shifts everything. And when we shift our vibration and our frequency to this place of knowing our worth, of knowing how lovable we are, of loving ourselves unconditionally no matter what, then the world opens up. We believe in the possibility. We believe what we are capable of. We trust ourselves, and from that place, we can create anything.
Mhm. Mhm. I love it, and I think that it's so interesting how it seems like such a fundamental and, like, easy belief, but like, it seems like this like, the easiest formula, right? But it's so hard to cultivate, and,
Yes.
like, I think what I really wanna point out here is that it isn't like I can assure you it's that it's not a uniform feeling, right? Like, you don't wake up every single day loving yourself, and you don't wake up every single day, um, you know, telling yourself that, like, it's not them, it's me, like, or sorry, the other way around, it's not them, it's not you, it's me. But, like, I think when we can get to a place where we can always shift back to that mindset of, I am me and I'm worthy of love and I'm worthy as a human being,
Yeah.
change really starts to become visible. And I've noticed that in my own life and I've noticed that in people who have gone on this journey to like spirituality and like getting back in touch with themselves. And when we are able to come back from like to ourselves and kind of tune out like all the noise of society and the media and stuff, it's transformative. So I love that you're doing that and that you
Yeah, and to speak to what you were saying about, you asked like how long did this take for me? It
Mhm.
isn't like a you hit like an end goal where you're like, oh, now everything is perfect and I
Perfect. Yeah.
totally love myself and I have no more work to do. It's a practice. It's a
Yeah.
daily practice. It's intentional. And you're right. It's not a one like formula that works for everybody. And for some people, because these beliefs are so deep within our core, and because um, we continue to attract experiences that reaffirm the beliefs that we already have, it is compounded and it's complex. And
Mhm.
so it takes time, and it depends on like if you had like if that memory of my mom in the bar was the only experience I had of feeling like my voice didn't matter, um, then it's easy to shift,
Yeah.
right? But if we have this belief that we're not lovable and we have 100 experiences that prove that to be true, then it takes time to unravel that and to rebuild something new. So it isn't like oh, I read this book and I did the things in it and now why am
Mhm.
I not better? Right?
Absolutely.
It's a process, and it's an intentional practice every day to be with yourself in a certain way.
And it really helps. It's that accountability factor, right? Of like,
Mhm.
picking up a book and reading it from start to finish is in its own way like an initiative, but like you can't expect things to just get better after reading the book, right? I
Right.
I think that that's such an important part to emphasize because I think a lot of people, I definitely struggled with this when I began on my self-help journey. Like I would pick up a book and I was like, okay, now I know all these things, but why is nothing getting better? So that
Right.
what you, so what you said really resonated with me because it's so far beyond the things we read, and it's also so far beyond just following the formulas that are written in the books, right? Because we can read something and it's going to resonate with us, but that doesn't exactly mean that it's going to be the way that we execute it in our own lives. So
Right.
it's such a well-rounded and like self-exploratory journey of like going through this process. So I love that you're doing that and that you're cultivating that philosophy in your own
Mm,
practice.
thank you.
hmm I know that we're on a bit of a time crunch, so I want to ask you one more question before we get to our rapid fire three questions at the end of the podcast.
Okay.
I want to go back to. I'm just really curious how and if you are sharing this practice with your daughter. Like, do you and your daughter tap together, or is she into the world of tapping?
Yeah, this is fun because no, she's not.
No kidding. Okay.
No, which is so funny because
Mhm,
ex- it just shows that we have to come to this stuff on our own and in our own
mhm.
time. Because I
Yeah.
was the same way with my own mom. She had so much knowledge to share, and she was living this world of like the wild woman for a long time and wanted to share it with me. And I'm like, nah, mom, I'm not interested in anything you're
Yeah.
trying to teach me. And it honestly wasn't until it was like the anniversary of her death,
Mhm.
the 1 year anniversary of her death, that I picked up the book Women Who Run with Wolves,
Wow.
which is the Wild Woman tome,
Uh-huh.
that I was like, oh, this is what my mom was trying to share with me. This is who she was. And it was like a passing down of like the torch from her to me in that moment. And it's really when I was like, okay, this is the work that I'm doing. I understand this now, and this is what I am cultivating within myself. And so, to get back to your question, is
Mhm.
I share this. I do share with my daughter. She hears this stuff from me all the time because it's just my beliefs, but she's not very open to
Yeah.
really listening. She often says, "Don't coach me, mom," and I'm like, I'm not coaching you, honey. I'm just mothering you.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
will let me tap on her occasionally, but she's not very interested in doing that. And so it's again, it's like a surrendering to knowing that she's getting the information because it's just natural for me to share it. And so I'm planting
Mhm.
seeds that will hopefully germinate and bloom when she's ready for that to happen. And she has all the tools there when she's ready to use them, and trusting um, that they will serve her at some point. But it is fascinating that my daughter's 9, and already at 9, I see these beliefs in her already about I'm not good enough, I need to be perfect, people don't like me, all of these things that shows me that these are like societal programming that just comes in. We cannot help it. We can't
Mhm.
fully protect ourselves that young from ever having these sort of infiltrate our system. So at some point, we have to do this work to help heal ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that at 9, she thinks she has it all figured out, right?
Oh, she totally does.
I think we all thought about that at that age, but I I think that's so important to like just like and I think that's an area where I see that you have cultivated what your mom cultivated for you, which was giving you that space to learn from yourself and about yourself through going through whatever it be pain and like experiences that like tell you, okay, I need to come back to myself. And I'm sure your daughter's going to have moments like that. I think we all go through moments like that, but I love that you're like planting the seeds like you said, but not forcing them on her, because I think that would only drive her further away from the practice.
Right. And
So
it's so important that at such a young age, I'm conscious of not instilling this good girl paradigm in her as much as
mhm,
possible. So if she's not interested, I'm not going to make her do
mhm.
like follow my way of doing things. She gets to figure it out on her own. She gets to trust her own intuition and cultivating that in her at a young age. So she does. She thinks she's got it down, and right, great. And she'll
Beautiful.
learn and she'll figure it out. But like,
Yeah.
I want her to trust herself. I don't want her to
Yeah.
lose that.
Absolutely. I think when we can strengthen our ability to listen to our intuition from a young age, it's going to shape our entire
Yes.
experience forever,
Yeah.
right?
And that's such a big part of this wild woman energy is trusting
Mhm.
our own intuition and trusting ourselves and believing in ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for all that insight. I absolutely loved hearing your story and your mission and what you're dedicated to doing. I do have a rapid fire 3 questions for you here. It's the first time I've done this on the podcast. So, rapid fire means you answer in a word or a sentence. And we're
All
gonna
right,
see
let's
how it
do
goes.
it.
All right. My first question is, what is your favorite quote?
Oh, it's actually on my wall right here. She had
Oh,
a
very nice.
gypsy soul and a warrior spirit. She made no apologies for her wild heart. She left normal and regular to explore the outskirts of magical and extraordinary, and she was glorious.
And she is glorious. She definitely.
Yes, she is glorious. Her name is Michelle Rose Gilman.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that that's on your. People can't see it, but I love that it's in your office. So that's incredible. Beautiful. My second question is, what habit are you currently trying to build or strengthen right now?
Mm. Um, It's always a dedication and devotion to my morning practices because
Mm,
I think having a morning ritual is so important.
yeah.
It's sorry, one word, one sentence. I won't
No,
dive deep into that.
no, 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 no. Super quick. Like, what does your morning ritual look like right now?
My morning ritual right now is I do some like kundalini energy exercises to sort of open up my body and my energy.
Mhm,
I do chanting and breath work. I do daily intentions and sort of prayer of like, what am I embodying? Who am I embodying? Who do I want to be in the world? What am I creating in the world? So I put thought and energy and intention into that every morning.
mhm,
And then I like to either journal or read.
mhm.
Mhm.
Exactly what a wild woman should be doing. Am I right?
Yes.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. That's very cool. My third and last question is, what song is currently stuck in your head right now?
What song is currently stuck in my
Yeah.
head right now? Oh my gosh. The one that pops up is Freedom by Kygo.
Oh, Kygo. Yes.
Kygo.
Oh, yes.
Freedom. I love that song.
Is that because of your daughter, or you just?
That is my song. I'm not
Oh,
going to
very
tell you.
nice.
Yes, I have a lot of my daughter's music in my head, but I try not to have that stuck in
Yeah, totally.
there.
That's that, and you know what? I love that the title of that song goes perfectly with what you're doing.
I
So
know, and it's
that's
just so
perfect.
fun. I love that song.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for answering those responses and for sharing with us your incredible story. And I can't thank you enough for being willing to get vulnerable with us and sharing that side of you today. I'm sure that the people who are listening are going to resonate with that a lot. And I hope that this touches whoever is listening to go towards your pain and not be afraid of it, and to face your past, because you might not be able to change it, but you can certainly create something out of it. So thank you so
Yeah,
much. And
yeah,
can you tell us where we can find you on your social media channels?
absolutely. Yeah. So you can find me on my website, which is shainagadow.com, or you can find me on Instagram, which is also at Shaina Gadow. And I have a freebie if anybody is interested in tapping video, a short tapping video on releasing anxiety. If
Okay.
you want that, I'll share the link. You can share the link in your show notes to
Yeah,
connect to that video.
I totally will. And I'm definitely going to try it myself. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you
Oh,
so much for being on the show. This was an absolute pleasure.
thank you. I had so much fun chatting with you.
I did too. Thank you so much, Shaina.
Mhm.
Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's episode. I hope Shayna's story impacted you just as much as it impacted me. Make sure to go check out her tapping exercise and check her out on all her social media channels. And until next time, you guys have a great rest of your week.